So our final guest this morning works closely with President Biden and other administration officials on everything tech and cybersecurity. Please welcome to the stage Deputy Assistant to the President and Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technologies, Anne Neuberger. Welcome. Thank you. Anne, I tried to memorize my script last night, and your title was my stumbling block, so apologies for looking at my cards for a little long there.
Skip any parts.
Hopefully the ride wasn't bad over here. Let's get right into it. You have a large portfolio. Cyber, emerging tech, national security can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. If we zoom in, where do you see the future of defense going, especially in the so-called gray zone, where cyber, electronic warfare, information warfare all blend together?
Thanks so much, Colin. And
Yes.
It's really great to be here. And there are so many new tensions and dilemmas in the space, so it's good to see this Axios effort talking about it and putting those issues on the table. So we see the contours of war changing in many ways. I'll give 3 examples as part of an anecdote, right? The evening before Russia invaded Ukraine, Russian intelligence conducted a cyber attack on an American commercial satellite company.
Viasat, correct?
Viasat, exactly. To disrupt, the company was providing communications to Ukraine's military, and the Russians wanted to disrupt that. And indeed they did, as well as tens of thousands of homes across Europe and businesses that also use this commercial satellite company. And that would have disrupted Ukraine military's ability to communicate, if not for the fact that SpaceX, another commercial satellite company with a very different architecture, which we'll talk about in the context of EW, jumped in to provide capabilities. Similarly, the evening before the invasion, Russia conducted a wiper, a destructive cyber attack to essentially erase all the data across Ukraine's military, government systems as well. And similarly, what enabled Ukraine to quickly recover was not only American and European cyber defense companies, but moving all their data to a commercial cloud to be resilient to that, to counter that attack. So you see both the offense and the defense. And finally, today we see just broader disinformation, hybrid warfare by Russian actors, both government hacktivists, criminals across Europe, the US, NATO. So taking that away, the geography of the battlefield has really expanded. The number of players, the kinds of tools, and what's considered a target, and really collapsed homeland and military. Second, we really see, we always thought about small numbers of high-end capabilities versus large numbers, as we saw in a SpaceX context. And then finally, the role of information. So those 3 things are part of this contour of war changing.
In that same framing, where is the U.S. the strongest? Where is the weakest? Obviously, the latter is a little more sensitive, but I'd like to get your thoughts.
Such an interesting question, because when you say where is the U.S., really one of our strengths is the power of innovation coming out of our private sector. And we want to play to our strengths in this new contour of war. So how the U.S. government, how the military works with the private sector needs to be. Those are some of the most radical transformations, and that's been a long time issue that we've talked about, the role of procurement and acquisition. And I think it's so interesting when you think about our strengths, that innovation is key, and when we think about an area where we are weakest, to your point, it's scaling industrial manufacturing. When we look at the US vis-a-vis China, what does China do? China scales, right? China's become the manufacturer of America. President Biden has been trying to bring back some of that manufacturing for really strategic technologies. But as we think about our strength, it's innovation. It's being at the cutting edge. It's the US government and private sector working together in new and innovative ways. When we think about an area that we probably are less strong, it's that scaling at industrial manufacturing.
Let's stay with the partnerships theme here. What's needed between the military, intelligence community, and private sector to get kind of this digital defense, digital awareness, info sharing right? I know that's a big focus for you and the administration.
It is. I'm going to use the SpaceX in the Ukraine context
Let's go back there.
Example, because it speaks, we can learn so much from examples in practical ways. What made the SpaceX capability so resilient to Russia's advanced electronic warfare capabilities is, we launched sophisticated communication satellites that we expect to be up there for 20, 30 years. What SpaceX did was launch thousands of satellites, all mesh connected, that they expect to be up for 4 years. So it takes less time to test and deploy. You can launch innovation faster. And if an adversary jams 1, 5, or 10 satellites, the communications can continue to move on the other. So it's much more resistant to electronic warfare. So what's needed between military intelligence and the private sector is an ability, when we see innovation in architecture like that, to operate with that, to pull that into our ability to project power, and also to think about how we help protect some of those ecosystems.
Are there, I know there are struggles with classification, getting secret, top secret, unclassified. How do you deal with that when you're jumping between commercial, military, and intelligence community, which is among some of the most sensitive stuff out there?
So I spent more than 10 years at the National Security Agency. I led NSA's intelligence operations, deeply value intelligence operations. But we're now seeing a poor man's intelligence, right? There's now commercial SIGINT and GEOINT capabilities that really rival in many ways what traditionally the intelligence community produced. So the role of classified information has changed dramatically. First, we want to ensure we're fully aware of that poor man's capability. In many cases, partners tap into that instead of us trying to work out how to share classified information, and then guiding our intelligence community to really integrate those new sources of open source, of generated information in an AI context, and SIGINT to be a more high-end differential capability versus saying, oh, it's classified, it's always going to be better. That may not be the case. It may not be unique anymore. What makes us have a differential intelligence capability is using AI to process data faster, of course in line with our values and laws, and integrating all different kinds of data faster to meet a particular issue.
You brought up AI, so I'm going to follow up on this. What does success look like for the federal government when it comes to artificial intelligence? Is it education, guardrails, something far more serious? And then I have a follow-up, but I'll reserve for now.
So it's all of the above. When President Biden issued his executive order, there were 3 words there or 4 words, but they really convey exactly the answer to your question, which is, safe and responsible AI. It means we need the innovation, reading right to left. AI can make a difference. You talked about education. When a teacher is teaching a classroom of 25 kids, many of those kids have different learning styles. AI can help customize that so each child can learn in their unique way, right? Clearly value there. But when we think about safe and responsible, which parent doesn't want to know that AI that's generating questions for their child has been trained and is safe in terms of the kinds of questions, even if it's customized for that child? So the role of the executive order, the US government's approach, has been to work with the private sector, both to hold them accountable for the things they need to do, to be testing, transparent on what data things are trained on, but also our role in both guiding and in eventually thinking about where regulation is appropriate, working with the Hill.
Regulation, perfect segue into what I'm going for. Is global governance or even consensus feasible or worthwhile? You have these accords out there that dozens of countries have signed on to for reasonable ethical use of AI and autonomy. There's some big names missing from that signing, China, Russia, namely. Where do you see global governance going with this?
There's a lot that's really important in global governance. There's a reason the United States put such work into leading the first UN resolution on AI and gathering as many countries as we could to join us, and a large number of countries did. And then there's a role for each country to use its model across the spectrum of tech and innovation all the way through to regulation to play to its strengths. In the United States, one of our strengths really is our innovation. It's no surprise that some of the most capable, whether open source, open weight models or commercial models, have come out of US companies. So we want to ensure that those models are both trustworthy, are safe, and also that we're leading in innovating both in the national security context, how we use them in line with our values, in our defense, in our intelligence. It'll be a game changer in intelligence, as well as across our economy and in civil society applications as well. I look at one example. My husband and I have been involved for many years with an ALS charity. It's heartbreaking. In ALS, a person's mind is there, but their body degrades. And now there are this not-for-profit, the work that it does is it allows people to voice bank. Somebody who gets diagnosed can speak words, save their voice, and then later, even just banging their head or blinking their eyes can be translated to their voice speaking. Imagine that for them, a mind locked in a body that's no longer able to do what it does, and imagine that for their loved ones.
You mentioned trustworthy, transparent models. The U.S. Army at one point was talking about an AI BOM, B-O-M, bill of materials, similar to a software bill of materials. Has that percolated up to your level? Do you have any thoughts about that sort of transparency or how that might work?
Such an interesting idea. So as you know, we've been, in the software context, the administration has been pushing hard on software bomb, bill of materials, real progress made in the president's first executive order. What's so interesting about bill of materials is it tries to give the ingredients to help people who are using tech, whether it's software or whether it's AI, know what's in there. So for example, on the Hugging Face platform with open source models, people put the contents, what data it's been trained on, how it's been red teamed and tested. So in that context, it's absolutely helpful, bringing transparency so people can assess, do I want to trust this model? A company can assess, here's a model that purports to help with hiring. Well, has it been trained on data that fully represents a real population set?
NATO is in town, if you couldn't tell, and I've probably mentioned it 6 times by now.
I think everybody here has experienced the traffic. Who has not experienced the traffic? Then you have your own quadcopter.
The best time to bring big meetings to town is like in the middle of like a heat wave too, so that's great. What does cyber cooperation across the alliance look like these days? You know, what's on the table, what's not on the table, what does the conversation largely look like?
2 core things, both capability and broader deterrence. I'll give an example here. You know, when about a year ago, we launched the virtual cyber incident capability at NATO to say there are 32 countries. There's a mixture of capability. You all know some of the more capable countries in there, Estonia, the Netherlands, Germany, the United States, of course. And if a country that's less capable gets attacked, how do we have a coordinated way to help quickly? We launched that a year ago, and it's already been used. When Iran attacked Albania's government networks, took down the networks, disrupted Albania's government's ability to serve its citizens, the most...
The U.S. Senate Hunt Forward team out there after that.
Exactly right. But we also use this new NATO virtual incident response capability to go out to members and say, who can help? Here's what Albania is asking for: malware analysis, intelligence on who did it, help recovering. 8 NATO members jumped in and helped, and in a coordinated way, brought that support. So that's the first piece, right? It's leveraging what's already there, but connecting it, integrating it, and getting it there quickly. The second piece of that is there's power in numbers. And a big part of making a more secure cyberspace really is countries calling out a country that violates international norms. There are norms in cyberspace, and Iran's attack on Albania violated that. You can't just attack and bring down a government via cyberspace. So NATO members together both attributed that and then stood behind Albania as they essentially PNG'd the Iranian ambassador, you know, put in place consequences for the cyber attack. As part of ensuring that international cyber norms, we start to put in place consequences when they're violated.
So what does cyber deterrence really look like? Because, I mean, you can't really talk about cyber offense, at least not in this room. You can't kind of cyber saber rattle necessarily because it is so sensitive. So how would you describe it or that process?
Cyber deterrence comes with a lot of tensions because there are many more actors. You have countries, you have political hacktivists, you have criminals doing it to make a buck. Many more virtual connected systems, right? We have hospitals connected to the internet, power systems connected to the internet, and of course, military communications. And the exploits, there's an entire exploit economy. So getting access to offensive tools has become much easier. So how do you deter in that kind of an environment? One part of it is countries working to deter country activities, and countries hold each other accountable when they harbor hacktivists and criminals, and working to enforce that. How that plays out in practice, there's a lot more to talk about there. And I think just a conversation around cyber deterrence and the different players, companies, private sector entities, civil society would help us knit that together.
We have a minute-ish left. I might drag it a little long because I have a good question for you at the end.
Okay, now everybody's really listening. Because Colin, you have a background in this space, so it's a good question.
But I definitely wanted to hit the Vault Typhoon hacks, which targeted critical infrastructure across the U.S. and Guam, which is a key U.S. military Pacific foothold. Those were disclosed last year. What does the Biden administration make of Chinese kind of poking and prepositioning on that critical infrastructure? And have there been any similar incidents since?
The geography of the battlefield, like we talked about earlier, in terms of the changing nature of war, the geography of the battlefield has expanded. One of the things that's been interesting to me in my years, I've worked both offense and defense, and we started to see that the vulnerabilities in our infrastructure, the fact that our hospitals are rated the lowest of all sectors in terms of their cybersecurity, became a strategic vulnerability. So when China thinks about potentially a crisis or a conflict and shaping America's ability to fight, both our public support for a fight, our military's ability to deploy, they pre-position in infrastructure, in our ports, because our military ships from the same ports as we ship cars, in our power systems, as part of potentially disabling or disrupting them in a crisis or conflict. That's the reason President Biden has made such a push on putting in place minimum cybersecurity requirements across critical infrastructure and in partnering with companies, because our nation's power, water, hospitals are all operated by private companies. So the government's need to work closely, to share intelligence, to hold accountable for those minimum cybersecurity, and also to launch efforts where we can. So you may have seen, we launched a free effort of free cybersecurity for the nation's rural hospitals, the poorest ones and the ones where if they're disrupted by a Russian cybercriminal sitting in St. Petersburg, American citizens may have to drive hours to get to another hospital. So that's the reason we launched that free program to the 1,800 rural hospitals across the country.
So I asked Chairman McCall what his favorite song...
I see wrap up.
I know, I'm getting there. I asked him his favorite song, album, musician, but I'm not going to ask you that. I'm going to ask you the... I mean, do you have one off the top of your head?
I do, but keep going.
Okay, you can tag team it. What's an AI myth we can dispel today, aka, when are the killer robots seizing power?
People often think about AI and they compare it to nuclear. We're in a race. Who's going to be there first? It's some game. It's a zero-sum game. I think it's more like cyber, the way we talked about it, where there's a range of capabilities and a range of things that can both bring value and that we worry about. Here's what I mean. I was talking to some folks at Deere, the tractor company, and they said, we're deploying AI to our tractors in the middle of farmlands across America, because when we're doing irrigation, we want to know, did it rain yesterday? Is it going to rain tomorrow? Do the crops look dry? Do they look sick? Those are models at the edge. They need to be low power, low compute, able to deploy. Think about the value of that, not only in the US, but in increasing food production in an era of extreme weather, right? Hugely valuable. On the flip side, we're already starting to see AI models being used by cyber criminals to expand what they're already doing. So that range of capability, and then you have the highest end, the kind that can control a series of tanks on a battleground or launch a drone based on the geography and AI learning where it needs to go. So thinking about that safe and responsible AI has to apply across that spectrum of types of AI capability.
I'm not letting you off the hook on the musician, so what is it?
So, I must admit, my love is, it's Hasidic music, which is more like, Jewish gospel music. Okay. It was the music of poor people in Europe 100 years ago. So there's a lot of beauty, a lot of hope and yearning for a better day. So that's the music that talks to me sometimes at the end of a long day or at the beginning of one when you're motivating yourself to go in there.
Like on the way here.
Exactly. Not here.
Well, I think our time is up there, so we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for joining me. Could we get a round of applause for her?
Thank you, Colin. Thank you very much.